I was on a hunting trip, and I was staying in my uncle's cabin in the dead middle of winter. It was a long day, and I was about to head back to the cabin shortly. It had been snowing lightly on and off, all day, but out of nowhere the snow picked up very quickly and turned into a very dense snowstorm. It was getting late, and I had a long way to walk back to the cabin, and I was honestly terrified, because it felt like every minute that passed by the storm was getting worse and worse. It was almost a miracle that I saw a light up ahead. It was a really bright light, but it shines dimly from where I could see just enough for me to notice it. As I got closer, I soon realized it was another cabin. My adrenaline instantly sparked, and I was happy to have found potential shelter. I would have had to walk miles upon miles in that blizzard to get back to my uncle's cabin, and I would have been screwed. I thought for sure I would have found myself lost in the blizzard searching for my cabin had I taken that route instead. Knowing what I know now, though, and with what happened to me, I wish I would have just manned up and found my way back to my cabin. But I could barely even see what was in front of me, and ultimately that played a huge part in the final decision of me trying to get in contact with whoever was inside. I was just hoping that my luck wouldn't have run out completely. What was the chance this guy was actually going to be a serial killer or something like that? I convinced myself that shelter was worth the risk. I approached the cabin and I knocked on the door. I heard footsteps that seemed like they were getting closer to me. I waited another 30 seconds maybe and politely knocked once again. It was a man who opened the door, and I explained my situation to him. He let me in with open arms and let me stay for the night, surprisingly. I told him I would be gone first thing in the morning. This guy kind of gave me the creeps, but being totally serious here, I wasn't that worried about it. People out here were known for being that way, kind of. Not necessarily creepy, but I could sense he wasn't the extroverted type. He was older, had really long hair, and looked like he hadn't showered in a while. He barely spoke to me at all. He gave me a pillow and told me I could sleep on his couch in the main room. I tried making small talk with him, but that didn't go very well. I didn't want to bother him any further, so I just thanked him once again for letting me stay. I told him I was going to try and get some rest. I lied my head down on the pillow and I was getting ready to relax. The man was now standing behind me, so he was completely out of my sight. I was waiting for him to walk away, but he stood there for a good 30 seconds or so. He didn't make a sound. I thought that was kind of weird, but still I didn't think much of it. Then all of a sudden he turned the light off over the sink, which was the only light that was on in the cabin at the time. I figured that meant he was finally going to lay down a swell, but I was wrong. He walked towards his room, and I started to doze off within minutes. What the F was that I sat up so quick that I almost threw myself off the couch. I looked back and all around me, but it was pitch black, so I couldn't see a thing. Everything all right back there, I asked. But there was no reply, to which I then stated all right, good night then. I was genuinely starting to get anxious, and I started to rethink my decision of staying there. I convinced myself that it was nothing, though, and that I should just try to fall back asleep. Finally fell asleep maybe 15 to 20 minutes after that. I have no idea how long I was out for when all of a sudden I awoke to the guy on top of me. First, he was literally only laying on me, long ways, with his body being stiff as ever. I awoke within seconds and I tried to get him off me. He was much stronger than me, though. He then started choking me and smelling my face and my hair and touching me all over, and he even tried to kiss me. I managed to headbutt him, which in turn gave me just enough time to gain the upper hand and throw him off of me. I ran for the door immediately and I forgot. Just as I was about to leave, I realized I couldn't leave without my gun. Turns back around to grab it, and there he was pointing my own rifle at me. I was close enough to him and fast enough that I managed to duck and weave and disarm him. He was a bit older, and that gave me the confidence to do what I had done. I hit him with the butt of my rifle and I ran out that door. It was still snowing out really bad, but I could tell it had lightened up just a bit. It was a long night and it took me hours. To find my uncle's cabin, I had to walk at least 2 or 3 miles if I had to guess. But that's only if I took a linear path to the cabin. Unfortunately, that was not the case. I was walking around aimlessly for quite some time, just winging it in 7 to 8 inches of snow in the middle of the night. It was a very cold and brutal night. I later found out from police that the person who owned that cabin had mysteriously disappeared years ago, and no one has owned it since. That legit gave me shivers when the officer told me that, because this guy was going to kill me. Scariest thing about it is I don't think they caught the guy either. Before I moved to Indiana with my girlfriend, I lived with my dad on a ranch in the middle of nowhere in a small town called Hartville in Wyoming. Seriously, this town had maybe 50 people in it total. It was really that small. A measly 25 of the population alone was probably my own family. I have 3 brothers, 1 sister, and, well, of course, my dad that I lived with. My mom passed away from heart disease when I was young, and it really sucked. It really sucks not having her around. She truly made everything in my life so much better, in all of our lives, actually. I had some aunts and uncles and 1 cousin as well that lived near us. I was going to miss them all, but it was time for me to live my own life. After all, I was 20 years old and I had dreams of the city life, and I always wanted to be a veterinarian. My girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife, and I are very close, and we have been since we met. What started out as a long distance relationship quickly turned into an 8-year marriage so far, and still going strong. The first few weeks in Indiana was amazing, apart from missing my family back home. It really felt like everything in my life was coming together, and I was unbelievably happy, to say the least. My wife and I just moved into our own house. This new house we moved into was also in the country, but barely what I was used to back at home where I grew up. It was nowhere near as desolate as my old house in Wyoming. We were probably only 5 minutes from the nearest city in Indiana, if that. But in Wyoming, my family and I were literally at least 30 minutes away from any store at all. Now, with all the good things that were going on in my life at this point, there was a bit of a problem. You see, the house in Indiana had a long history of sketchy and weirdly horrific horrors and rumors about it. Some of them were true, and not just rumors. Some of them were flat out fake as hell, and I knew they weren't true. However, before Leslie, my wife, and I moved into the house, it had been broken into at least 3 or 4 times, all in the span of 20 years. We only knew about this because of our neighbors, and we definitely believed them. We had no reason not to. Plus, besides that, Leslie told me about how she would see this guy on her property sometimes while I was away at work. This happened at least 3 or 4 times that she was sure of anyways. We had no idea who the guy was, though. He only came around during the day, and every time he showed up, apparently he would stare from the end of the road and then slowly make his way up to the house and up to the kitchen or the dining room and clear inside the house. Every time this happened, Leslie called the police, but they never caught him. He would always be gone by the time the cops made it there. Most of the people who live in rural areas are nice and really sweet old people, or just middle-aged parents with a family. But every once in a while you run into a real whack job like this guy. Country is a good place to lay low, and unfortunately there definitely is a place for everybody. A lot of lowlives, aka sex offenders or druggies, will live out there to try and stay low-key and under their radar from the police or just people in general. I, of course, was very concerned about this guy, and Leslie was deeply terrified of him, understandably. You never really know what someone is capable of. Anyways, we'd be okay because I had a pump-action shotgun along with a .45, handgun and revolver. And even at that, I had my fair share collection of knives and daggers. I reassured Leslie that everything was going to be okay. Well, one night around 10:30 give or take, we were hanging out in the living room watching a movie, and we were both half asleep. Shockingly, we both wake up to a knock on our front door. It was extremely loud and completely out of the blue, so it jump-scared the living out of us. I trumped up and ran to our room, and I grabbed my shotgun out of the closet. I was about ready to lose my cool, and I looked out of the blinds first to make sure it was someone we didn't know. We both got a good look at the man, and Leslie confirmed it was the same stranger who had been showing up to the house unannounced time and time again. He hadn't seen either of us yet at this point. I opened the door and I prepared for the worst, but just like that, he was gone. I stepped outside and I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I told Leslie to go back inside and grab the 45 and to sit in our room on the bed and wait for me. I looked all around for the man. I was yelling at him and telling him to show himself. That's when it hit me. I looked over to my left and I saw that our shed that we don't even use the side door was wide open. I ran over to the shed and I started hearing noises inside, almost like somebody was moving stuff around. The light was off and I couldn't see a thing. I didn't say anything because I didn't want him to know I was right there. I was just going to wait for him to come out. Something got a hold of me inside and I couldn't hold back. I was so pissed off that he was scaring Leslie and with him disturbing our night. I was genuinely infuriated. I wasn't going to let him get away with this, even if my life depended on it. Slowly but surely made my way to the door, and I was almost inside now. Took one more step, and now I was directly under the doorframe with my other leg behind me, still touching the grass outside. I looked inside and the noise stopped. He must have heard me or noticed me somehow. I went to turn on the light, but of course the light bulb was out because it wasn't turning on. That's when things went from horrible to much, much worse. Out of nowhere, the man started running towards me and I stepped back. I couldn't believe it, but I accidentally pulled the trigger in a panic. Stood still in disbelief as I couldn't believe what I just did. Thankfully, I didn't hit him. I actually missed my shot completely, but it didn't even seem to scare him. He continued running at me, and I hadn't pumped the shotgun yet after shooting the first time, and at this point I was probably 10 feet away from the shed, and there he was. You're staring right at each other. I had the gun pointed at him and I told him to leave where I was going to kill him. He called me a coward and he said that I wouldn't be able to do that. I didn't have the balls. Then he proceeded to call me every name in the book. Then that's when the police sirens came about in the mere distance and we both knew he was done for. I looked at him with a deceiving smile and I dropped my shotgun as he tried to run away. I tackled him to the grounds and I put him in a full Nelson and I held him there until the cops arrived on scene and let them do their thing. I'm glad Leslie called the police. I was hoping that's what she was doing, because I didn't tell her to. Everything happened so fast and I was worried she wasn't going to call them, considering the last 3 times they showed up 30 minutes late each time. Anyways, we are sort of worried that he's going to try to come back. We do have a restraining order on him, but obviously there's really nothing stopping him from coming back if he really wanted to. When he gets out of jail, that is. Or maybe he already is out of jail, I'm not totally sure. All I know is that if he does come back, his ass is mine, and next time I won't be so nice. Family comes first, and I won't let anything get in the way of that. Leslie and I are trying to move, but it's a lot easier said than done. You spent just about all of her savings on the down payment of this place, so we're going to have to hang tight for a while. Music. I made one of the most idiotic decisions I've ever made a few years back that ultimately led me straight to a downright horrible and absolutely barbaric situation with someone that I presume is honestly a serial killer or even worse, potentially. I'm a 21-year-old girl and this took place about 3 years ago to be exact. I was 18 at the time, and I had just graduated high school. It was the middle of August, and it was a relatively boring day. Up until this point, my summer vacation was extremely boring. My dad and I lived alone, and he was extremely protective of me, so much so that I feel he was abusive, emotionally and psychologically. He wouldn't let me have any friends whatsoever. And every day I had to stay home, I had to either help him with chores around the house or pretty much to be his personal slave. He even took my bedroom door off the hinges to make me feel completely powerless. He never let me have an ounce of privacy until he finally got me a phone. I got my phone about a month before this all took place. He would usually take my phone at 8 o'clock every night, but he was extremely drunk this night, and he didn't get home from the bar until about 10 o'clock or so. I guess he forgot. Either that or he thought I was asleep. So he didn't bother, I'm not sure. Probably a mixture of both. I had Tinder on my phone, and I used that as an escape to meet new people and to socialize. Through all my years of isolation, I was never really able to meet any good friends. Most of the kids at my school either pretended to be my friend or just flat out picked on me and did their best to make my life a living hell. I had been talking to this guy who we will call Alex for this story on Tinder for just over a day, and our friendship progressed pretty quick. I knew I had to be careful though, because my dad would snoop through everything in my phone, so I had to delete anything on it that my dad would not be okay with. Every night before giving him my phone, which 100 included Tinder, he would have killed me if he knew I was on there. Anyways, this guy I was talking to was 28 years old at the time, and him being much older attracted me as he boosted my confidence that an older man was talking to me. But looking back even just a few years ago, I can see how it was definitely kind of creepy of him to be talking to someone my age. Anyways, I told him about my situation at home, and he said that I could come live with him. He reminded me that I'm an adult now, and I legally don't have to abide by my father anymore. I was extremely excited by this, but also terrified. He told me that he could pick me up tonight, and then I should get my things ready. I told him that I wasn't really ready for that yet, and that I just wanted to hang out for now, and I asked him if that was okay, to which he agreed. He told me he would be there to pick me up at midnight, and I said okay. I told him that I needed to be back home by 4 a.m., and he said that was okay too. I also told him not to drive down my driveway and to just park on the side of the road and to text me when he's here, and that I'll just come out. My dad's house has kind of a long driveway, and I was kind of scared that my dad would somehow hear him pulling up and wake up, so I figured him parking further away would be much safer for us. He then told me that he preferred to talk over text, so he asked me for my number. I gave it to him, but I told him that on any other normal night, unless prompted otherwise, to not text me after 8 o'clock. He already knew about my dad, so he agreed. Sure enough, Alex showed up like 5 minutes past 12 o'clock, and he texted me to let me know he was outside like I asked him to. I texted him back and said that I'll be out in just a few minutes. Snuck out of my window, and I started making my way down the driveway, and I didn't see any sign of Alex. Like I said, my dad has a decently long-sized driveway, and each side has a bunch of trees that outline the entirety of the driveway, all the way down to the end of the road by the mailbox. I thought it was weird because I figured I would see a light coming from his car or something, but I think I just figured he had his car turned off to be more low-key and less suspicious since he knew about my dad. As I was walking down the driveway, I was probably about halfway to the road, started to hear some whispering. I sat there for a moment just observing. Then I heard a man burst out in laughter and quiet down really quickly, and then the whispering continued. I started walking again ever so softly, and I made it within probably 20 feet of who I thought to be was Alex. I could finally start to hear what was being said. I came to the conclusion that he was on the phone because he was having a conversation, but I couldn't hear anyone else speaking back. Now, I can admit I was eavesdropping, and this isn't something I would normally do, but given the circumstances of the situation, I'm pretty sure you could understand why I had my guard up so high. I'm extremely glad I did, because I would probably be dead right now if I hadn't. And that's when I heard the most sickening and disturbing thing I've ever heard in my life. He began bragging to whoever he was on the phone with about how he was waiting for me and how he was going to rape the out of me and, I quote, keep me alive for as long as possible. I literally almost puked when I heard this, and I made a bit of ruckus. Apparently because right after that, Alex seemingly became eerily and abruptly quiet. I thought about running back inside, but I thought I had a better chance of just hiding. I ran back in the direction I came from, a little bit towards the house, and I took a heart right into the woods, and I hid in this spot that I knew about. I figured I would be safe for now. About 5 minutes had passed and not a single noise came about, and I got a text from Alex. It read, "Where are you?" I obviously ignored it, and he didn't seem to buy it, though. I think he knew I was onto him. He started getting extremely angry with me, and he tried to make me feel bad by telling me I wasted his time. And that's when his true colors came out. He started cussing me out and telling me about how horrible I am and how no guy will ever love me and that sort of thing. Then he said something that truly frightened me to my core. "I know where you live, just remember that." Then he hung up. Almost right after that, I heard a car turn on and speed off, and that was thankfully the last time I heard from him. I really wanted to keep the peace, because he knew where I lived, and I was just hoping he would stay away after this. I lied awake all night in bed wondering if he was going to come back or not, and I was terrified he was going to kill me. I blocked him on Tinder and from my phone number as well, and I called my grandmother the very next morning while my dad was at work, and I told her what happened. I completely confided in her about my dad, and I told her about how horrible he had been to me my whole life. And she came and picked me up, and we didn't tell my dad anything at all about what happened. My grandma always knew my dad was horrible, but she never knew truly just how bad he was to me at home. I was too scared to tell anyone about it for the longest of time, but it was truly the best decision I've ever made. I've since been much happier, and I'm working on getting my own place with my girlfriend. Life has been moving along, and I've been healing and getting better each day. I tried to contact the police, but they told me they couldn't do anything without any proof, so I knew I was screwed. It's more than likely that Alex is still out there hurting others, if that's even his real name. Last year, I was renting a house in a small, economically depressed old mining town in Virginia. I lived alone. On one of the first warm nights of spring, I fell asleep in my living room on my recliner. But I unpleasantly awoke around 4 a.m. to the sound of my doorknob turning. I figured someone must have just had the wrong address or something, but the doorknob kept turning persistently. I didn't have a peephole or a window to see who was outside, so I just approached the door from the inside and yelled, "Hey, you have the wrong place." Then the door started shaking violently, and the hand began punching it. "Hey, get the hell off my property, you." "Wrong house," I screamed. The man, who was on the other side, then growled at me and started making these weird and horrifying noises like a wild animal. I grabbed a knife from my kitchen drawer and called the police, and I waited inside for them to arrive. 2 officers showed up, but by the time they arrived, the person was gone. Cops did a sweep around the house and looked for him thoroughly, but there was nobody. They left, and the police told me to call again if something comes up. So I went on about my day, and by now it was 5 o'clock in the morning. I didn't go back to sleep because I was just too anxious about the whole situation. Later that evening, when I got home from work, I was concerned that maybe someone broke in Now that was nothing more than my anxiety talking, and I had no reason to actually believe that, but that's all I could think about all day at work was that that same person was going to come back. Well, when I got home, everything seemed normal and no signs of anyone or a break-in or anything suspicious at all. Fast forward later into the night around 9:30, 10 o'clock, I was lying down on my couch reading one of my books when all of a sudden I heard a strange sound. It was very quick but quite loud. It sounded like it came from inside, but I wasn't sure. I forgot about it and I continued reading. Not very long after that I heard the sound of someone talking, but it was muffled and I couldn't make out a word. They were saying, "Where the hell is it coming from?" I asked myself. Okay, now I knew I wasn't insane and I knew someone was here. I started to panic and I had a horrible feeling that the strange unknown person came back. I looked around but the sound stopped completely. Then out of nowhere, I heard this vicious scream that I've never heard anything like before. Imagine a man was screaming at the top of their lungs as loud as they possibly could in the most demonic yet humanly way possible. Now my adrenaline was through the roof, practically in overdrive. And then I had a sudden realization. The only thing that came to my mind was the crawl space. I wanted to call the police, but at the same time I didn't want to end up looking stupid again. So I decided I was going to try and handle it myself for the time being. I walked outside of my back door and then went around the house because it would have been much easier for me to enter the crawl space from outside rather than from inside. I'd actually never seen the inside of the crawl space up until this moment. I opened it and there was a guy who appeared to be sleeping or pretending to be or something. Or maybe he was just on a crap ton of drugs, which thinking back I'm sure was the case. I managed to control my frustration and I didn't say a word to him. I called the police immediately and stepped out of the crawl space area and I waited around for them. And when they showed up, I showed them the man I was talking about. The cops dragged him out of there and sent him to the hospital to be checked out and then to jail. This man had been practically living underneath my house for I don't even know how long. He had a sleeping bag down there and a lantern and a bunch of food that he had stored away. I was horrified when I found this out, and I couldn't get a good night's sleep for weeks. How the hell did I not notice he was down there all this time? He was like a freaking homeless zombie who was cracked the F out apparently. If you want to listen to more spine-tingling stories like this, do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more tales that will keep you up at night. Until next time, when we'll embark on another journey into the unknown, have a wonderful day ahead, and as always, hope you enjoy today's scary story.